Hello, this is Christoforova. Today we have with us Ivo Brughmans, who is connecting with us all the way from Belgium. Ivo is a philosopher, political scientist, and management consultant. Welcome, Ivo. So great to have you with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Ivo, so maybe to set the context, let's start with a little bit with your story, how you ended up going into management consulting and then becoming an author and lecturer and working with companies around the world.
Yeah, well, I studied philosophy a long time ago, let's say, but but it's also the paradox in myself that philosophy that is very high level, very reflective, and I also want to do something practical. I studied afterwards political science, and I want to be a journalist, but anyway, I was interested also in business, in making things real. So I started in consulting, who was well quite a different world because as a philosopher you think about the big questions in life, and also as a consultant you're dealing with complex issues, but also well to solve them, to get to a result, while philosophers are quite open, asking more the questions, while the consultants going to the solutions. So I did that. I worked 25 years for an international consulting firm. I very much liked it. I was a very, what they call here in Belgium and the Netherlands, a very blue consultant. That means one with the 5-step implementation plans, with the spreadsheets, with all kind of PowerPoint presentations, etc. And that is also one side of me. But the other side of me is also, well, not creating change by having these beautiful plans, but like Socrates, asking the right questions. And anyway, I was triggered by this topic of paradoxes. That is, I think, my core mission to do in this world and in this life. I was from a very early age, because you're confronted that you have very different sides of yourself. Sometimes if I do one test, I'm an extreme extrovert. Do another test, I'm an extreme introvert, and both is true. So the question is, who are you really? And also in my upbringing, my mother was Dutch and my father was Belgian. They met in Paris, and it sounds like they speak the same language. But they come from different cultures, and it's only, it's very small here in Europe. It's 50 miles up north, and you're in Holland, and 50 miles down, you're in Brussels or in the French-speaking part. So anyway, it is in this coming together of different cultures, and that my interest is raised in this paradoxical question. But anyway, I wrote my thesis on logical paradoxes in philosophy long time ago, and it rested for 25 years. But then it became, well, let's say 10 years ago, or more than 10 years ago, it came up again, because I was traveling a lot for my work, and asking myself, how can you bring together sustainability with growth? Because everyone wants to grow, your economy want to grow, you want to grow as a person, but also you want to, in fact, minimize your footprint. But that is a kind of dilemma, and how to deal with that. And I was thinking, is it only a dilemma, or is there also kind of compromise in between? Or is there a both-and solution, something that you can grow unlimitless, but also protect the planet? In fact, it can be both. That was one of the questions that I start writing about it, and also in my job as a consultant, I was very much confronted with the movements that organizations make, from centralized to decentralized, back again to centralized, and asking myself, is this a very sustainable way of of changing, of developing, or are there other ways? So these are my points of interest to start writing about this topic. And while my first book was published in 2013, exactly 10 years ago, was in Dutch. But anyway, now after 1 year, well, it was discounted. No one wanted to read it, etc. But I believed very much in the matter, and while I did my consulting work as my first job. But then 4 years later, I wrote another book because Paradoxical Leadership, because I very, very much believed in it, and I think, well, this will contribute not only to a better world, but also to better performing organizations, more innovative organizations. And then in 2016, 17, well, it started to fly, the idea, because the time was ready, the time was ripe at that moment, and because the uncertainty in the world and the polarization has also augmented, and there it is really trying to find an answer for it. So anyway, I got so many questions from organizations to talk about this topic, so it became my primary work, and I tried to combine it with my consultancy job. But anyway, I started in 2018. Well, this is my full-time job now, to give lectures on this, workshops, trainings on this subject. So, but I really think, well, this is the thing I'm getting very enthusiastic about it. So finding my right track in that.
And I'm so glad that everything everything connected. Your work in philosophy, and then your management consulting work, working with organizations, and now none of it went to waste. All those experiences now you can utilize.
Absolutely, and that is very, very correct that you say, because sometimes I say, well, why was I not start? Why haven't I started earlier with doing this? But anyway, I needed this, in fact, to build further on this, because I needed this 25 years of hands-on consulting work to really be able to reflect on it and to propose other things. And it gives me also the credibility with boards, because I've been in the trade and I know how organizations are run, and that makes a big difference.
Very true. And I think also your story of how you published the first book and it wasn't popular, and then you published another book, you did not give up, you published another book, and then with that book you got momentum going and could start your own business and do your life's work now. And it just shows how important it is not to stop. I, for example, myself published more than 20 books, so I know what it feels like. And I think that it's just such a great story. So just to highlight a little more details for people, because I think it will give people hope, especially people who already published one book and it wasn't popular. And the thing is that one thing I want to mention here for everyone listening, that your book can be absolutely exceptional and it will not be viewed for years and years and years, maybe not even in your lifetime. Because, for example, my best book, I believe the best work, is actually the book. I was looking at the sales yesterday of the books, actually the books that is sold the least. So it actually, there are so many things going into it, the name of the book, the title, and so on. So maybe you could give us a little more of the details on kind of what was your experience writing that second book, publishing it, and then what happened? Did people started writing to you? How did it work that you decided to leave consulting?
Yeah, well, and it's really true. It is not giving up, but in fact, it's a very intrinsical motivation. I feel this is the thing I have to do, whatever price, whatever obstacle to do. I want to realize this because I think this will make the world better. And well, I don't need it financially to write books or to do it anyway, but it is something that it's a drive from within. But then also the timing is crucial. If you publish something that is brilliant, because I worked hard and hard on this first book, and it was the best book ever written. You know the feeling. Um, I took two sabbaticals, one of 9 months, and then afterwards, after 9 months, I found a publisher, and then I rewrote it completely because it was unreadable, to make it to adapt it to the public. Anyway, that helped me because that built my basis on understanding this matter. But then only 4 or 5 years later, then the time was right, because you saw organizations more and more struggling with the fact that straightforward solutions didn't work anymore, that it is more kind like navigating and balancing and how to do that, because you can be quite philosophical about it, but what I want to do also in my book is also the link between the philosopher and the consultant, give people another glasses to look at the world. That's one thing, another perception. But on the other hand, also give quite practical tools so that they can apply it tomorrow in their work without being too instrumental, but also without being too philosophical in that sense. But anyway, that worked very well because there are my and the reason, well, I published first 3 books in Dutch, and then I've published my book in with the University of Toronto Press, and it was interesting because it's not so frequent that as a European you can enter the US or the North American market, but my publisher said, well, what makes the book unique is that it is about complexity and how to deal with complexity, and everyone is finding ways to deal with this complexity on the one hand, but there is not so much written about it. There is nearly nothing written about it to make it also tangible and concrete. And therefore, yeah, I think it's a universal theme. If you're where you are in the world, everyone deals with tensions and polarities and dilemmas. And my lectures are also, if I sometimes I have mayors of cities. Sometimes I have surgeons, brain surgeons. Sometimes I have board members, and sometimes I have nurses. So it's a very or police officers. Everyone in their profession deals with tensions in different values that are competing, and they try to make a choice in it, but anyway, it's to see how to bring them together. If you're a nurse, for example, you have to be efficient on one side because you have only 5 minutes for each patient, but on the other hand, you want to take personal care, you have to have personal attention, etc. For a police officer, it's also, yes, you have to garden the rules and to make the world safe. But on the other hand, you don't want to escalate things. So how are you dealing constantly with this with these tensions? And you need both, in fact, to have a sustainable solution.
That is very true. Ivo, and at the beginning of your latest book, you have this quote: when trying to outline their identity, people often make a grocery list of common traits. That's a mistake. They would fare much better if they made a list of common conflicts and dilemmas. And that was a quote from Yuval Noah Harari. I was wondering if you would be comfortable to share some conflicts and dilemmas that you saw in your own identity or in yourself that helped you outline your identity as an example for our listeners.
Yeah. Well, like I say, my vision of myself is that I'm what you say, a kind of a bin full of contradictions, in fact, huh? And it is in when you're an adolescent, that is very confusing because you're looking at your identity. Well, when I was an adolescent, one day I was a hippie, the next day I was a punk rocker, and the third day I walked with a tie. And so the question is, yeah, who is the real Ivo in this? And that is can if you're in an adolescent phase, this is quite confusing. But later you understand that these different aspects of yourself, that's also a strength, in fact, because you can switch between being very practical and very conceptual. So there are you're full of contradictions, but there are contradictions that you manage without any problem. For example, between with me is that between activity and rest. Well, I feel when it's time, I work very hard, but I feel when it's time to rest. So it's the natural flow. It's no problem. But my issue is also the tension between control and working together with others, for example. Um, Yes, everything. I like to have it very controlled, have it my way, etc. That makes it that's an advantage because then you really know what you're getting. But on the other hand, if you want to amplify your message, if you want to broaden your scope, it's not only you. You want to have others working with you, and that is also the tension. Okay, what is then what do you want to set as a basis, or what do you what autonomy do you give people? And that is, well, I see it in my training, in my workshop, that is often for managers a big challenge. Control and letting go, control and giving autonomy, or and that's also in my life, and that's also a little bit in the philosopher and the consultant. The consultant wants to get to a result, and the philosopher wants to get it open and ask more questions and diverge, etc. So I've always this tension between, okay, let's opening up, like let's explore, but then when you go back to something concrete and something tangible. So these are some dilemmas I still struggle with it, because it's not it's and it's okay that you struggle with it, but you need to be aware of it, because you know when you're in one side or you're in another side, and sometimes you go from one extreme to the other. I can be, for example, very patient, very patient, very patient, and then start being very impatient. Then is you go too far in one side, you have to correct it to go too far in another side, and that may be a mismatch. Then you want to have better balance in that.
That is very true. And I think that is a great place for us to share the metaphor of the bus, the work
Yeah.
of Italian psychiatrist and psychotherapist Roberto Assagioli. If you could share that story.
Yeah, well, the question that you ask yourself as a philosopher is, all right, if you are all these contradictions, who are you really then? Is there something, a real Ivo hidden somewhere below layers of education, of socialization, etc.? Is there a real one? But I don't think there is a real one. I think we are these contradictions. But that's also not very satisfying to say, well, you're all this, because then you're nothing. Who are you really? And then I use this beautiful metaphor of the bus. You're not one person, but you're, let's say, well, a whole bunch of people, sub personalities who sit in a bus, and there is one at the steering wheel, And there, just behind the driver, there are some subpersonalities you very well know. These are the subpersonal, like okay, you need the action man comes forward, or you want you want more in a reflective mode. These are roles that you can master. But anyway, also behind, let's say at the end of the bus, there are, well, persons in this bus you really don't want to see. And these are your shadow sides. These are things that you want to put as far as possible away. But anyway, you can't, the more you push them away, the more they become angry, and they want to go to the forefront. And it happens sometimes if you're, sometimes if, give me an example of my own life. Sometimes in the past, when I went on holiday with my family, the third or the fourth day of my holiday, I was a very, very bad tempered, for a little bit toxic for my environment. And I asked myself, yeah, why is it? Well, that is this horrible. I'm with my family on the only occasion this year to be together, and I'm so horribly bad-tempered. And I thought, well, it's the environment, it's the country, it's the people, etc. But next year we went to another place, and I got the same thing in the third, fourth day of my holiday. And then I thought, well, I think it's not. It would not be. I think it's not the environment. It's myself, and it's my polarity, in fact, because at the back of the bus there is this person that has that I push away. That is the person who is really want to set his clear boundaries, but in a very aggressive way, because I put him at the end of the bus. And if I would be more, let's say, have a better balance between, on the one hand, let's say, pleasing people or being very nice to people or be very helpful, and on the other side, having clear boundaries, etc., then I would not have that would not have that impact in my life. But then they're at the end of the bus, and you can't control it, in fact, because it's something that pops up. It's an emotion that pops up just at the moment that it is you cannot allow it to be there. um, and in fact, you're not, in fact, the director of this bus. You're not saying, okay, who is going now to the front stage, who is going now to the driver's seat. In fact, you are the observer of the bus. You know, okay, right? Okay, who is now at the steering wheel? Okay, oh, that's one aspect of myself. Being aware and taking also the responsibility for that. That is, I think, the key message of that metaphor, because it goes on and on. These changes of of subpersonalities, but it is often a very unconscious process, and we blame the environment that this happens, but it is something inside you that is triggered.
That is very true. And it's so interesting because I use it in my work with clients all the time. I call it different parts of you. And what I actually found a way to take control of which part of you comes forward, and then to strengthen the parts that you want. But it's such an interesting topic. I'm so glad that we're talking about it, because it really is so powerful and can solve a lot of issues for people if they dive into this topic. So we're talking about inner world polarities. And now it's probably a good time to start thinking about, okay, but then I have a lot of polarities. How do I prioritize which polarities I should focus on? And I know that you speak about how you need to find where you experience the highest level of tension. Mm-hmm. So maybe let's speak now about, so for our listeners, they now understood the importance of identifying those polarities, and then in terms of the inner world, and then what would be the next step for them? How they prioritize which ones to focus on, and then what should they do with it?
Yeah, well, it is a question of feeling. It is not something that you can say, okay, I make my priority list of polarities. Um, it is the ones who raise the most tension. And that can be tension in the sense of, okay, I'm flip-flopping from one extreme to the other, or I have two sides of myself that are not connected. If I'm at holiday, I'm laissez-faire. I'm go with the flow. If I'm at work, I'm very disciplined and controlled and structured. And I like to have a little bit of this relax, that being relaxed in my work. So that is the thing that gives you most tension. And it is not a question of observing it from the outside, it is from feeling it from within. What annoys me, in fact, what gives me tension. And that is often interesting. You have to dig deeper, because there are some core polarities that influence all the rest in your life. And maybe there are two or three core polarities that are really you, that is really, and relating to this quote of Harari, in fact, these conflicts determine more your identity than specific values. It's the tension, it is the theme that defines, in fact, the struggle. But anyway, it is going deeper. For example, I do always a constellation exercise. I ask people, they do it in pairs and they coach each other to write the two polarities they struggle with on a piece of paper, to lay it down on the ground and to step into it and to feel what is happening. And you see it also in the body language that people express, and that's different often than what they think or what they say. But it's interesting, people start with a sort of polarity. For example, I had someone who said, well, between activity and rest, between, and well, okay, interesting. But then she stood on the on the pole of rest, and all kind of emotions came up. And that means that there is something below. And what was below was, in fact, rest is I'm good enough as I am. And activity is I'm good enough if I achieve something, if I'm recognized, etc. And coming and recognizing this aspect of myself, I'm good enough as I am. That is linked to rest, but rest is not. It's only the surface, and it's going deeper and deeper in layers. And then you come to some core polarities that influence your functioning in your work, in your private life, and that come in all kind of forms, and you encounter it in all kind of dilemmas that you face daily. So that is getting to your core polarity, or core polarities, because it's not only one, it can be two or three, but it's not 10, etc. So and then you can, being aware of it, that's 50% of the work. Being able to name it, to give it a name, and it is searching to the right words, because it's oh, is it this? No, it's something else, and that makes you go deeper. But then being aware of it, then you can start also trying to say, okay, how can I, what are possible ways to combine them in a way that fits my job. And I'm not, my book is not a plea for having a kind of yin yang synthesis. In fact, sometimes you have to be in one pole, sometimes you have to be in the other one. It is about agility. It is about being very conscious in moving from one side in the other. In some context, you need to be very introvert. In other context, it's good to be very extrovert. Anyway, you can switch, but in the long term, you need to have both to have a kind of balance in your life. And then you can also look at different ways to bring them together, because they don't need to come together nicely in one kind of synthesis. It can be that, for example, you are very structured, but you're also very creative, that you're very structured in your work, but that you're very creative in your spare time or in your hobbies or whatever. So there are different ways to bring them together.
By the way, Ivo, is your name pronounced Ivo?
Ivo, yes, yes, yes. It
I
is.
want to make sure
Yes.
I call you correctly because I said Ivo in the beginning.
Yeah, yeah, no problem.
Beautiful name. Is it short for something or is it full name?
No, no, it's my full name. It's full name. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's
I love
yeah.
it. Ivo, so this makes me think about situations where so you mentioned that usually, let's say 2, 3 polarities that really drive someone's life. But then let's say we see someone who is a workaholic and they work all the time. And if they're not working, they feel they're wasting time. They should be working. They lost, oh my God, I lost an hour. I could have done so much. But they're
Yeah.
unproductive because of it, because the brain is so tired. We are not robots. We cannot work all the time. So in a situation like that, do you think there's still a polarity there and the other side is just completely not paid attention to, but it's there? Because
It
this
is.
thing definitely
Yeah.
drives someone's life. This
Anyway, I think, well, this polarity you can them have in a different mix. You don't have to have 50-50. You can have 80-20. You can have 95-5, but you can never have 100-0. Because if you work all the time, then you get exhausted. And if you have a very good energy level, well, then you can sustain it for a long time. But sooner or later, if your energy level, yeah, diminishes, then you got then the polarity comes up as an issue. Huh? Then you get an issue. Um, and so you cannot notice it. You say, well, fine, I'm a workaholic. That's the way I am. I'm a workaholic myself. I work 7 days a week, but I enjoy it. And I'm lucky I have enough energy levels. But I also take into consideration my risk. If I don't do that, if I say, well, yes, and I still have to do, yeah, it's too early to go to sleep. I have to do this and this because tomorrow that and that. Yeah, then I know I have to pay the price a few days later. But anyway, it can be not an issue now because I don't feel it, but it can be at the long term, it can be an issue. And of course, it can also enrich yourself because you're a workaholic. Then often you're in the same track. You're not innovating because you're doing always you're on track. You're just in the activity. And sometimes slowing down and doing nothing is a basis of creativity. My best ideas um, are in a period that I don't have to do anything, so that I completely free, and I don't have the pressure, and I have to take this time off because otherwise I only do production. And in the times when I'm very in what I feel discomfort. If I'm with an issue that I can't hold my finger on it, I cannot solve a problem that I cannot solve, and a situation that is full of tension. Then I want to get rid of it as soon as possible. But staying in this discomfort, allowing this discomfort, gives me the creativity to come to something else. And if I want to disregard it immediately, then I just go on the same track. But just to go in and to allow this, what I find incredibly difficult. But there, my best ideas are rooted in this kind of situation where you are in a complete discomfort. You don't know, and for a control freak like myself, it's terrible to not know. But there you get the greatest ideas.
Very true. And actually, I'm thinking now in that example of a complete workaholic who really drives themselves as much as they can. what confirms to us that it is a polarity, that there is another side, is that there's usually a self-correcting pendulum swing occurs, and they get sick, God forbid, or something, and they're forced not to work.
Yeah, exactly, because the system always corrects itself, and it can be correcting itself very smoothly, or it can be corrected itself with a big bang. And it often is sometimes with a big bang, because you're thinking, well, I'm overstretching my limits, and then the system shuts down immediately, and you don't have to say anything about it, because then you're in a kind of burnout or even depression, because you cannot function anymore. Your system correct itself, but not in the way you want it to correct itself.
Very true. And so I'm thinking that for our listeners to have practical application of what we are talking about, when they're thinking about polarities within themselves, it may be even more helpful for them to think about, okay, so what are there some most destructive things that are happening? Maybe 2-3 things within me that are happening.
And then you talk about yourself, huh? Because you can
Yes,
also
I'm
have
still
it
talking about the inner world, yes.
the inner world. Okay. Well, anyway, that is this, like you said, flip-flopping from one side to the other, don't having control about aspects of of yourself, and yeah, getting also stuck in a dilemma that is not productive. You're getting stuck, and you're giving yourself the blame, because you're fixed in it, and you think, I need to solve it. I need to make a choice in one way or another. But it narrows down. In fact, if you don't look at your polarities you narrow down your potential, and because you all these aspects, and if you narrow down your identity to one aspect, that gives you clarity, that gives you a clear identity, but it also narrows you down. And I expect, for example, in my work as a consultant, I was very successful in building shared service centers, and that I wrote a book about that, and that was my brand. And I was very successful, so I identified with my brand. But then world changed, and there was no need for that service offering in the market anymore. But I was still identified with that, not only myself but also in the outside world. So it was quite difficult to transform it to something new. So I have to let go this shared service center, but go what is beneath, and that is the capability to have a complex business transformation, but then focus it on something else, and to realize digital transformation, for example, who was completely a different area, but uses the same competencies. But often you are too long focused on one aspect, one brand, and then you get stuck into that, and it takes you a very long time to reinvent yourself again. So therefore, it's important to be very aware that you can be very specialized in this one, but also having this broad view on the other side, so that you can switch more easily, and you don't fix yourself to one aspect there.
Ivo, and given your deep work on dilemmas and polarities, starting from the beginning of your career, when you were writing this latest book, did you had to not include some of the things to make it broadly acceptable?
Did I need to change things to make it broadly acceptable?
Maybe change things and also not include some of the things that are more difficult to understand.
No. I think, in fact, it is exactly the same points that I raised 10 years ago. Then, of course, it has matured, etc. But the core messages are unchanged. but I think also the environment has changed. It's in that sense. I speak in my book also about shadow aspects. That is the aspects you don't want to see. And for example, you see in the last 5, 10 years that these shadow aspects are more and more recognized, also valued. For example, you get books from Brené Brown about the power of vulnerability, or about Susan Cain about the power of silence, and or being quiet, the power of being introvert. These are all aspects that were 10 years ago, for example, not so much valued, because you need to be strong and powerful and etc. And now you see also that in many of literature, the other side becomes more important, and and that is also allowed. And people say, okay, right, these both sides, they have a right to exist, and they have both they have both a value, and they have both a power in itself. And in the past this was good and this was bad, and now it's more balanced. So in fact, I talked about it 10 years ago also, but now you have the climate is different also. Also in organizations, I worked in consultancy in, well, 10 years ago or 20 years ago. It was also kind of macho world in that sense. If I look at organizations like McKinsey, who are very, very result driven, and if I now see, for example, they I work with them with their Aberkin, with their personal development company. It's very, very spiritual. It's very purpose driven. It's very empathic. It's they felt themselves that they need the other side also to have that balance.
Ivo, and so I think that our listeners now understand what to do with polarities. And I think it is easy, also relatively easy to translate it to then to the team level and organization level. We touched a little bit on dilemmas. Let's expand a little bit. We still have a few minutes left. With dilemmas, let's say for the inner world, kind of keeping it core, but then it's easy to expand it to organization and team.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say someone identifies some key dilemmas they have. What do they do with it?
Yeah. The dilemmas is often at a service level, at a surface level. A simple dilemma is, yes, do I after our meeting, am I going to relax with a glass of wine, or am I going to do my duties and do my mailbox often? That's a beautiful dilemma, and you can do both, but not at the same time. Well, maybe. But it's interesting to see what is below it. What is this about? What is this? This is on the one side my sense of duty and responsibility, and on the other side my need to relax, to also this idea of being good enough as I am, without any achievements, etc. So it's very interesting to see what is below that. So it's always a dilemma is something that you're struck in a kind of, I have to choose. Then you go below it and see what are the two aspects of yourself that are often complementary. And then the next question is the paradoxical question: how can I do both? How can I do the duties I have in a more relaxed way, for example? So you come from a dilemma, you go below it and see what are the polarities, that are the values that are conflicting, that are below. And then you ask the paradoxical question, how can you combine them? But because you cannot combine them at the level of dilemma, because then it's kind of splitting it in half, kind of a little bit of this, a little bit of that. You can say, well, um, uh, then you get a kind of gray compromise where well that is nothing of both, and a little bit in between. So in order to come to a real both end solution, you have to go deeper, not to the forms, the concrete aspects, but to in fact the drivers that lay below, and to see how to connect them.
That is very, very helpful. So with the just few minutes left, let's expand it a little bit. It's actually very easy to expand for our listeners even without us, but expand it to the level of team and organization.
Yep.
So for someone who, many of our listeners, they have a team they're managing. Many of our listeners have a large team. How would you recommend they use our conversation today to make positive changes for improving the team's performance?
Exactly. Well, I think it's important to discuss also with your team what are the core tensions that you struggle with in your daily job. If you're working, for example, with teachers in a school, then you ask your teachers, what are the key tensions that you struggle with? And for example, then you just write them down. And one of the core polarities can be, okay, right, we have to stick to a collective educational plan, but there are children with special needs, and how do I switch between the individual needs and the collective achievement that I have to do? If you recognize this as a core polarity of the team or of the organization, you value also people, you see people in the struggle that they have. And then this giving this polarity explicit is 50% of the work, because then people feel recognized and people can start handling the polarity. And handling the polarity, I think it's very important to have this dialogue, because you have very diverse people in your organization, and some like to be very much focused on the individual, some like to very much having the overall collective and the overall rules, and you have very different personality, and they have their place in the organization. But what you want to do is also to learn from each other, and also to create a common culture where people from both sides can learn from each other, to also to create a style that includes both these aspects. And I call this in my book the paradoxical dialogue. How are you going to steer your organization based on this dialogue? Because we cannot prescribe all situations that will happen by all kind of rules saying if this then that. People have to be autonomous and to have make their own trade-off, and you need to allow them making their trade-offs by learning from each other, but also by setting clear boundaries. What are the boundaries that you don't want to cross? But within these boundaries, you can move between being very empathic until very businesslike, etc., depending on the situation, depending on the client, depending on the project you're managing. So you're giving this freedom, but this freedom is not something purely individual. This is also something that you want to make collective and learn from each other, how other people in your team make these trade-offs. And that in that way you can create a kind of consistency and a kind of overall working together, overall culture, but at the same time giving also the freedom to people to make autonomous trade-offs, not by prescribing everything in a top-down way.
Ivo, and when a leader sits together with the team and they figure out what are the main tensions, I assume you would recommend them to focus on their own circle of influence versus what is happening with the organization.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm just going to create a little bit more light. Is it too bright? Well, anyway, yes, of course, the circle of influence is of a crucial importance because often when I talk to organizations and say, well, what are the core polarities? Yes, that is the board needs to be more this and that, etc. But it is also, it boils down to your personal competencies, your personal polarities. Um, you can say, well, my colleague this and that. I'm a hard worker, and my colleague is quite lazy, etc. That is a polarity at the level of the relationship, and often you cannot influence the other because the other is like he or she is. But your polarity is how I'm going to deal with this person. Am I going to confront him or her, or am I going to ask nicely or invest in the relationship? Huh? That is my polarity, and that is my conscious choice that I have to make. And often we try to work on the polarities of others, but it starts with yourself, and therefore I always start my workshops and also my book with this personal aspect. And we elaborated a lot about the personal aspect, and that is where it starts because you, as a leader or as a professional, you take your own polarities to your work and you influence in that way your environment.
That is very true. This is such a good place to end this session. Before we do that, Ivo, do you have anything else you would like to share? Anything you wanted me to ask you and I didn't?
Good question. Um, no, I hope that people have also enough practical tips, and maybe something two practical tips I want to add. Maybe that is one is if you make decisions as a leader, not only communicate about the end result, but communicate about the process and also about the dilemmas you have encountered in making this decision. What are your trade-offs? What are your struggles? Because that makes it also transparent and more acceptable to others to see why you have chosen this way and not the other way. And maybe you will choose that way in another situation. That is one thing. And the other thing is surround yourself also with people who are willing and to able to contradict yourself, because it's not nice, but anyway it will make you a better leader, because giving uh, having people who have a quite different view that can be so complementary to your own, and let's say fill out the blind spots that you have yourself. So these are two practical tips that I want to give.
Very good tips. Ivo, and one last question from me, very quick one, and we will wrap up. It's just general question that I love to ask. In the last few years, what were some aha moments, realizations you had that really changed the way you look at the world and the way you look at your life, or the way you look at your life?
Oh, that's a good one. I I'm more and more convinced that drive comes from the inside, and it whatever happens in the environment, it can help you, it can be an impediment, etc. But it doesn't matter in the long run. I believe in this subject, and whether my book is an immediate success or not, I believe in the marathon, and I believe that um, and therefore I think that is my insight. Um, uh, Really having connection a bit with what you drive, what is your deep drive that gives you the wings to overcome all kind of um, disillusions or etc. So, and anyway, it helped me to get where I am now, because 10 years ago I had a book that was a failure in Belgium, and now I have a book that is internationally distributed, and so it's and it is just not saying, okay, I want to write a book. No, it's a drive to do that, and you have to follow that drive in one way or another.
I 100% agree with you. We actually have a program called the Master Plan, where one of the things we focus on is helping clients identify what is that life's work that they would pay someone to do because they just cannot not do it. It's so important for them. And that is exactly what you found. And you're such a great example of it. Ivo, where our listeners can learn more about you, get your books, and so on?
Where they can, well, they can find me in on my website, and that is paradoxical, what is it, hyphen leadership.com. And maybe you can mention it on the website. And of course, the beautiful book I'm going to show here, Paradoxical Leadership, who is now 1 month in well, all everywhere available in the US and in all over the world.
I have a copy as well here.
Yeah.
It's very good one. And I have it on that part about the metaphor about the bus that I wanted to ask you.
I see it.
Ivo, thank you so much for spending this time with me. I really appreciate you being here with us. And for everyone watching and listening, our guests again today have been Ivo Brughmans. I just will spell your last name in case anyone is listening and trying to find your book. It is, so the first name is Ivo, and the last name is Brughman.
Yes.
Check out Ivo's book. It's called Paradoxical Leadership. And I'll see you all next time.